Today's episode is sponsored by the Steamboat Institute. The Steamboat Institute promotes America's first principles and inspires active involvement in the defense of liberty. Well, hey guys, it's Erica. Welcome to the Worth Your Time podcast. I'm so glad you're here today. My guest today is Helen Raleigh. Helen came to America from communist China with $100 in her pocket and a dream to get an education and live the life her parents and grandparents never got to live. Her dream and perseverance, working multiple jobs while attending school full-time, paid off when she achieved 2 master's degrees and ultimately became a business owner, author, speaker, and more. Helen's inspiring story of immigrating to the United States comes with some hard-won gratitude for the opportunities our country has given her. In today's interview, she tells us some of the things she experienced growing up in China and how she feels when she hears Americans today talking about bringing socialism to America. It's always so interesting getting the perspective of someone who wasn't born here, giving us a peek at someone else's understanding of the country I think a lot of us may take for granted. I really loved talking with Helen, and I really think you'll enjoy this conversation. All right, everyone. Well, today I'm talking with Helen Raleigh. Helen, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Erica.
Well, I explained a little bit of your story in the opener of the podcast today, but I would love to hear more from you. We know that you were born and raised in communist China, and you came here to America in 1996, and you didn't know anyone. And I'm curious if you could just tell me that story in short, and then also what gave you the courage to take such a huge step in your life?
Well, thank you, Erica. That's a good question. Maybe I answer your second question first, that I would not be here in the United States if not for all the love and support from my family. I wrote a very detailed story in my first book, Confucius Never Said, and documented it was a difficult decision for me to come, especially personally, a difficult decision for me to decide to come to the United States to pursue a master's degree because, even for the first semester's couple $1,000s, it was a tremendous amount for my family. I didn't want to do it, but my parents and my sister and brothers, they gave me everything they have, and even borrowed the money from neighbors and friends, all because they want me to have that experience to come to the United States, to be the first person to come to the United States, from my family to come to the United States to study, to have the exposure to the best country in the world. So if not for them, I wouldn't be here. So when I first came, like you mentioned, after my family paid for the first semester's tuition, I had less than $100 in my pocket, and it's actually not even all U.S. dollars because China had a foreign currency control back then. There was a cap basically for how much money each person can carry, and simply, my family was not wealthy. I simply didn't have money. I didn't have that much money. So my brother was working for a hotel back then, so he had to secretly exchange Chinese yuan with the hotel guests, try to get me some foreign currencies. So even $100 I have in my pocket, it's not all US dollars. I have like 10 English pound, like 20 Australian yuan. I remember when I went to the local bank when I first got here, the bank clerk was really surprised I had all these different foreign currencies. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's how I got started. And because all the love and support from my family, I was just determined that I have to succeed. Like, to me, failure is not an option. So I found the 3 on-campus jobs, working at a Chinese restaurant and be a tutor for math for undergrad student, and also working at the computer lab as a help desk assistant, and at the same time maintain a full-time as a full-time student. And so, it was very demanding, but it was also very liberating, because compared to my parents, especially compared to my parents and their generation, I know everything I do was for the benefit of me as an individual, and everything I do was in my own effort to shape my own destiny. And that's actually was a luxury that my parents and their generation were not able to have. So even though life was difficult, it was challenging back then, but it was also very uplifting. So that's kind of an early story.
And where did you move in the United States?
I first came to upstate New York. It was a small college, part of the SUNY state of New York system. It's called Oneonta. So it's like halfway between Binghamton and Albany.
Okay. And so when you were growing up, was this always a dream that you had? And did you really think it would become a reality up until that point that you actually took the step?
It was not a dream when I was growing up, because in my book I mentioned, when I was young, China was still was not an open economy like it today. So I experienced many things that's unimaginable to same age Americans. I experienced food rations, I experienced the starvations, I experienced the political brainwashing and all those things that's just unimaginable to many Americans that in my same age. China didn't start opening up until I was in high school, and so I didn't really imagine to come to United States until actually I first got the idea was from my sister when I was already in college. It became a possibility. When I was in college, I met my first American professor. I met the first foreigner, and he really helped me open my eyes, kind of instill that idea in my head that coming to America to study, was something possible, but it was remotely possible. I didn't know how I would be able to have the money and the resources to do it. So he really was a great help. He helped me to open the doors. He wrote recommendation letters. He taught me about this whole graduate school application process and also recommended some schools. So he really was a great deal of help. If not for him, I probably would not be here.
Did you speak English when you came over?
I did, but not very good. And there are many words that, like, I know grammar, but there are many words, like especially slang words or just culture-related words that it's just things I've never exposed to. And also because China opened up so late, late in my teens, there are many things that I'm exposed to we're like 20 years behind from everybody else. I remember when I went to grad school here in the United States, and one of my classmates asked me, who was my favorite actor, and I mentioned Gregory Peck. He had heard of him, and our secretary, our 60-year-old secretary, an American, and she said, "Oh, I knew him. He must be dead." I'm like, okay.
So, like, you're saying that movies and music and all of those mainstream things in America, when that finally was able to come into China, you were older, and so everything was just rolling in late.
Yes. I had to catch up. I'm still catching up today.
Well, I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, I think about that sometimes, the way that slang words or just cultural references are just so ingrained in the way that we do things that I can't imagine trying to learn that going to another country and a new language. It almost seems like you would need a lifetime to really fully grasp everything.
Yes, I'm telling you, assimilation is a lifelong process. You don't just
100%,
complete it
yeah.
in the first year. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so you talked a little bit about what it was like growing up. I was wondering if you could expand on that, because I think a lot of times people today, especially Americans, maybe younger Americans, don't fully grasp what it was like growing up in a place like communist China. What are some of maybe the other things you experienced that would be sort of a warning to those that don't think of it as maybe all that bad?
Let me just share with you one story from my book, Confucius Never Said. When I was young, I mentioned earlier that we lived through food ration. So the way the food ration was distributed is based on your age and the gender. So for the same age boy and girl, the boy would get about 4 pounds more rice than the girl each month. Okay. And so, but my name was a boy's name because there was no ultrasound back then. Before I was born, my dad was for sure he's going to get another son. So he got a name picked, and the name has my Chinese name had many good meanings, so he didn't want to change it after I was born. So anyway, so on my household registration paper, which everybody had to have, it said my gender was a girl, but because my name was a boy's name, the bureaucrats made a mistake. So for a number of years, they've been giving me the food allocation that meant for a boy, the amount meant for a boy. And so even with that additional 4 pounds of rice, every month, I was still hungry because it wasn't enough to begin with. And but one day, the Chinese police came to our house because they do regular check and they can show up anytime. They really do not need a warrant. They can just come show up anytime to check on how many people live in this house and compare this to our household registration paper. Anyway, so he compared our paper to all of us at home, and he realized they made a mistake. But of course, he wouldn't say they made a mistake. And so they accused us intentionally fraud the government. So he said, well, you guys have to pay back the actual food your daughter had. So yeah, and the food was distributed based on food stamps, and the food stamp was different. The usage is different compared to United States. United States, only poor people, people who are on welfare will get a food stamp. But in China, everybody received a food stamp because the food stamp was a way for the government to limit the demand of the food supply because there was just not enough. Okay, so everybody had a food stamp. So these officers asked our family to pay back the actual food I had, by giving back additional food stamps. So it was really put my family, in additional diet we had to do in order to save enough food stamps to pay the government back.
Okay. I had a quick question. This just popped in my head, and I hope it's not an ignorant one, but we hear a lot about the one-child policy in China. Is that something that affected your family, or how prevalent is that in affecting families in the country?
Yeah, I got to ask about that question a lot. So China did not institute implement the one-child policy until 1980.
Oh, okay. And is that and they did away with that recently, didn't they?
Well, not exactly. So prior to 1980, under Chairman Mao, the idea was the more children you have, the better, because you are producing more communist soldiers, right? But after Chairman Mao died, after the communist parties, some wised up communist party realized that Chinese economy was at the brink of a completely collapse after Chairman Mao died, because due to his policies that the Chinese economy cannot afford to support this many people. That's when in 1980 they forcefully introduced the one-child policy. And that policy is deeply unpopular. It also created a gender imbalance in China.
Yeah.
And now they realize this huge problem because there's like millions of Chinese men will never be able to find wives because there are more boys than girls,
Yeah, it's just so, it just doesn't make any sense. And so after that happened, once they implemented that, and there was this massive prejudice against girls and women, did you feel that as a woman? I mean, what was it like to be a woman in a society where women were not valued?
Well, the most direct problem is the voices has been silenced by those baby girls who were forcefully aborted. They never get the chance to live, right?
Yeah.
So they are the silent victims, in this whole atrocity. That many of them got abandoned because if you have a girl and if you still want a boy, the only way you can have a boy is you abandon your girl. So it was tough, but I would have to say, but in the general culture, there's not a direct discrimination against a girl. There's just policies. This one-child policy had this indirect impact, actually kind of reinforced the traditional belief that a boy somehow is better than a girl. And so But in terms of like getting equal education opportunities and all those other things, I didn't really feel a direct discrimination just because I was a girl. I actually think that that discrimination came after now, more prevalent now when China becomes wealthy. There are many Chinese men have mistresses, and many companies openly hire girls. They want you to submit a picture to show you are pretty, and so to me, those actually the wealth as China become more wealthy, and some of the ugly discriminations in the past actually are brought back to more in the daylight.
So you're saying that if a business is looking to hire a woman, they actually ask her for a photograph as part of the interview?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you for answering that question, because I was not sure. I didn't realize when that policy was implemented, and it really is such a sad legacy of all the women and girls that were lost in that. But we'll go back to your life journey in the United States, where you said you came here, you got 2 master's degrees, you ultimately became a business owner. Now you're an author, you're a speaker. But you said failure was not an option. And on your website, in one of your videos, you said your favorite quote is never give up. And so how does never give up, how has that defined your life to take you where you are now?
Well, that has a lot to do with things I learned from my parents, especially from my dad. And when I was young, he got into a traffic accident. Which injured one of his legs, and he had to learn how to walk again. I have a detailed story in my book, and I really learned from him that you can never let the circumstances define who you are and define your fate. No matter what the circumstances is, which means a person has to find a way to overcome and never give up. And that really helped for me when I came here, because I mentioned I didn't know anyone. We had no family here. I was the first family member here from my family here. We had no friends other than the American professor. We had no friends, and I had to find a work on my own, navigate a completely strange culture on my own. Even though I came here already speaking English, but my English was not that good. So practically I have to learn everything as new. And so many times that it's that belief that I have this great opportunity that my parents and my grandparents, my great-grandparents, there are millions of people who came before me, or even a contemporary age that people did not have. So I cannot fail. And so it's just a strong belief. And I believe if you have the strong belief and you set a clear goal and work at it, and this is what is make America great, is everybody can come here and remake themselves. Because there's really no limitation for if you're willing to work hard, and if you set your goal, and there are plenty of opportunities for you to get where you want to be. And so that is why I really reject when people tell me, this country somehow is originated through something bad, and it doesn't treat everybody fairly. And to me, it's, yes, this country has problems, but the problems this country has compared to many other countries are so insignificant. But the opportunities this country provides are so much more significant than anyone can imagine from in any other country. That's why it doesn't matter what your skin color, doesn't matter where you come from. Millions of immigrants, I'm just one of them. Millions of immigrants came here with nothing and can still end up living an American dream. That is what makes this country so great. And I'm not the only one who never give up. You ask many immigrants you meet, they will tell you they never give up. And because they never give up, they now live in their American dream.
Well, you talk in your book, The Broken Welcome Mat, you talk about how the immigration system is broken, though. And so I'm wondering if you can tell me, how difficult was it for you to actually become a citizen? And how is that same system that you went through still causing problems today? I mean, we're seeing it, we're seeing a lot of problems right now on the border specifically, but everyone, I don't know one person that looks at our immigration system and says, wow, this thing is working great. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So I will focus on the legal immigration piece first because I don't think we talk about legal immigration enough, and which we should. Our legal immigration system is broken. It's basically it's mainly driven by two concepts: family reunification and birthright citizenship. And so to somebody like me who does not have family here, family reunification doesn't apply to me. But I have skill sets, I have education, I speak English, and I consider myself would be a perfect fit, United States. But because I don't have family here, I wasn't born here, so the path for me to become a U.S. citizen was actually quite narrow. I did it through work, through employment-based immigration. But because our legal system is so focused on family reunification, a majority of the immigration visas is dedicated to that particular category. So for employment-based immigration, the number of visas is very, very limited. So people like me have to wait for a long time to wait for our turn, which, for someone, when you are right at your most productive age, and you don't know if you can stay here legally for how long, and it will be difficult for you to make many important life, decisions like, do you want to get married? If you get married, should you have kids? Should you buy a house? Should you change job? And so there's a lot of limitations. So it's not a very good system. And in my book, I highly praise the immigration system like Canada and Australia have, which they have a merit-based system. So majority of visa goes to people on employment-based application immigrants. So basically, they encourage people who come here come to their country already have skill sets, have knowledge that they can find a job in their country, which they can create a win-win situation. So their economy can get the labor they need, and for the immigrants, they know they're gonna find a job there. So to me, that is a much better system. And I'm glad the President Trump is actually talking about a merit immigration system as a reform idea. He mentioned it a couple of times. So I think that's really where we should go, and I think that's how we can fix our legal immigration.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you said you were going to comment on illegal immigration as well?
Yes. So I think the illegal immigration part of it, because our legal immigration is so broken that it's take us a long time. And like I said, the path is very narrow for somebody like me who has no relation here to want to come here legally. So for people who cannot wait, then I'm not endorsing what they do, but for many people who cannot wait, especially if it's a young man who has a family to take care of, for them, the easiest way, the shortest cut is to just cross the border, illegally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's one explanation. Of course, right now, what we're saying is our asylum policy is also broken. The asylum by the UN definition is usually focused on, political asylum. People are declared as asylum seekers because they're facing imminent life-threatening danger because of their beliefs or their genders, whatever. But right now, that system has been abused. The Wall Street Journal just reported now because our own policy fault, children now became passport. They're openly being treated on the other side of the border. The coyotes offer a discount price for families taking children. So basically using children as a passport to try to come to this country and then declare asylum. They really jammed up the asylum process, and which make his life so much more difficult for those other people who actually facing life-threatening danger, a fear of persecution from their countries to go through the process. So we really have to change our asylum policies as well.
Yeah, it's like so many people really are just looking for a better life, but then there's this group of people with kind of corrupt intentions that are using those people and using a broken system in a really awful way. And it's really hard to watch just because we feel sort of helpless, as just citizens that are sitting back and watching it. So thank you so much for commenting on that. And you mentioned the Wall Street Journal, and I know that you recently wrote an op-ed there about how socialism destroyed your great-grandfather's life in a sense. And, today, we all hear it. Socialism has become trendy to talk about. We have people running for president that are talking about that as if it's something they want to implement if they are elected in some ways. So what is it when you hear candidates talking about that, or just citizens talking about how they want to implement socialism in some way, what thoughts do you have about that?
My first reaction is I just want to scream. I want to shout out on the top of roof, just tell people don't do it, And that's really why I wrote my first book, Confucius Never Said. I think stories matters, real life experience matters. I recognize that when I tell people, hey, socialism is responsible for killing 100 million people, I know that number is so big, it doesn't make any sense to most people, right? As horrific as it sounds. So I learned that we have to, when we talk about socialism, the evil of socialism, we have to put names and faces to the sufferings. That's why I shared the story of my great-grandfather. That's actually his story came from, was an excerpt from my book, Confucius Never Said. His story appeared in the first chapter. And so I think it's important when we talk about socialism, we need to put a name and faces to individualize those sufferings. Because people can dispute about the policies, but what they cannot deny, they cannot dispute was the real life stories, real life sufferings. I lost family members during the man-made famines. I mentioned in my book. I lost, my dad the other day. I was talking to my father, and he told me, hey, his arthritis is really bad. So I'm like, oh, Dad, I just asked him. I said, how did you get arthritis, so bad? He told me it was because when he was young, lived in China, that he had to go to this elementary school, which is far away from his village, and there was the road was flooded, and there was no nothing to help him, and so he has to cross the flooded waist-deep water as a child to walk to the school every day, and because half his body is soaked in the water every day for months. That's how he got arthritis. And because the medical care was so poor back then, his family didn't even know what caused his pain. They thought he broke a bone or something, so they find some bone setting doctors try to work on his bones. So they had no idea he had arthritis. It just stories like that really just breaks my heart.
Do you distinguish between socialism and democratic socialism? Because I hear people say, "Oh, it's not the same thing." What do you think about that?
I think democratic socialism is a bait and switch scam.
Yeah.
It's like try to put a lipstick on a pig. I mean, it's not even fair to the pig, but it's like there's nothing democratic about socialism, because if you look at the definition of socialism, it's about the government owning the majority of the production and the distribution of resources. It's not done by a democratic way, and it's done by force. It's done through it's being done through coercion. That is why no matter where socialism was implemented, whether in China, Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, all these countries again had very different culture, different language, different history, and different people, yet they have one thing in common, which was socialism failed in all these different countries. So there's nothing just because today's socialists try to add an adjective in front of socialism does not change the evil nature of socialism. We have to push back very forcefully to let people know there's no distinction from a Democrat socialism versus the socialism we all know. It's the same thing. It's the same shades of evil.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that we hear a lot about these days is white supremacy. And I was wondering, as an immigrant to this country, as an Asian American woman, have you ever felt discriminated against? And do you think that white supremacy is a real thing in this country?
So it's like a layered. I'm gonna give you a layered answers. First of all, I don't feel I've been discriminated often. It's not something define me, and I did experience individual prejudice, and that can come from people of all skin colors, not just white people. Mm-hmm. But I did experience individual prejudice. But I can tell you, I experienced that kind of individual prejudice when I was in China too, because sometimes some people are they are stupid, they are prejudiced, yeah. They are biased. So I don't think it's a systematic issue here in the United States. Because I think if it is a systematic issue, then I wouldn't be here talk to you like this, right? I would have no chance to succeed. And if it's a systematic issue, then you would not have all these millions of immigrants who will still want to come here and be successful. So to me, that is a wrong narrative to think it's a systematic issue. But does it exist? Yes, absolutely. And I do believe white supremacists exist, because when I published my book about the broken welcome mat, it was right around 2016, and I had some doubts about then candidate Trump's some of his rhetoric about immigrants, mm-hmm. And I received hate mails from both the far right and the far left, and use some similar languages, tell me to go back, the four-letter words of where I came from, and I don't belong here, and some really derogatory, phrases about the Chinese, about my heritage, about my accent, about all those things. So I do think it exists, but I think they are very fringe group too. I think majority of the American people I encountered are very warm and generous and respectful and helpful, and that is why many people come to this country like me who had no roots here are able to establish a root here and live a very comfortable and happy life.
Do you still have concerns about the way President Trump speaks about immigrants?
Sometimes I wish he is. I like his policy better than his rhetoric.
Yes.
I think he actually has better policies, but sometimes, sometimes I wish he tweeted a little less. And sometimes I wish he tweets a little bit differently, really, because I think the office of U.S. presidency carries certain dignity and demands respect. And so I just think some of his tweets are not necessarily reflect that, but I try to be very fair with him. So when I generally like his policy better than his rhetoric. So when what I'm trying to do is, especially as a political opinion writer, that I try to focus on his policy ideas and try to separate the policy from the person who tweets.
Yes, I don't think you're alone in that, Helen. So we were in Steamboat Springs last week at the Freedom Conference with Steamboat Institute, and you spoke about the protesters in Hong Kong right now, and you even asked us to stand up and hold hands in solidarity, and we sent out this picture of us saying, we stand with you, Hong Kong protesters. And so I think a lot of people hear, oh, there's this thing going on in Hong Kong, but aren't fully informed. For those listening, could you just briefly explain why are people protesting and why is it so important that we're supporting them and that their voices are heard?
Yes. By the way, the picture turned out great.
Yeah.
I so appreciate everybody at the Steamboat Institute and all the attendees, indulging me and show their support. And it's such a wonderful picture. I love it. I've been sharing it everywhere.
Good. Well, we're glad.
Yeah. So, and yes. So regarding to Hong Kong, the protest initiated because of an extradition bill. So basically, this bill was rushed through the Hong Kong legislature by the Hong Kong chief, Carrie Lam. The essence of the bill, should the bill becomes law, it will allow Beijing to demand Hong Kong hand over anyone that Beijing considered as a criminal. Well, as we all know, Beijing as an authoritarian regime, their definition of criminal is pretty wide.
Yeah.
And so Hong Kong people are rightfully concerned that any human rights activists, any dissidents, or any China critics, Beijing critics, would be forcefully sent to mainland China if this extradition bill becomes law. So that's how the protest originated. But now, after 2 million people peacefully took to the streets of Hong Kong to demand that the government, Hong Kong authorities, to withdraw the bill, the Hong Kong authority refused to do that, even though they said the bill is dead, but it's really the bill is just dormanted. So any legislator or any future chief of Hong Kong can still bring a bill back. That is why people are still protesting. And also the protest at this stage has expanded beyond just people protesting this extradition bill. Over the last 20 years since Hong Kong's handover from the UK to Beijing, Hong Kong people have seen witnessed the firsthand that how their economic freedom and political freedom have been eroded under the Beijing's governance of Hong Kong. So now at this stage, the protest has expanded to a pro-democracy protest. Hong Kongers want not only just the bills being withdrawn, but they also want universal suffrage, which was something Beijing promised under the One Country, Two System declaration in 1984. And so that's why the protest is still going on, and the purpose of the protest has expanded. Why should we care? I mentioned several reasons at the conference. From both economic standpoint, from national security, from legal, from a strategic standpoint. There are many reasons we should care. But ultimately, I just want to emphasize the moral reason. The United States has a unique role since its birth. In President Lincoln's words, our country, United States, is the last best hope for humanity. We are the beacon of light for everyone who seeks freedom and rise up against tyranny. This is why you see this in 1989, Chinese students on Tiananmen Square erected a Chinese version of Statue of Liberty, and they read the Declaration of Independence. This is why you see Hong Kongers waving American flags and singing American anthem. Our country stands for something. We stand for freedom and liberty. And Hong Kong has traditionally, historically, has been this shining example, this best example to show how the wonders of capitalism, right? Hong Kong has absolutely no resource. It's a tiny little island. Why it's always ranked number one in terms of freedom and prosperity? It's because capitalism. So if our country let Hong Kong fail, let Hong Kong fall in front of our eyes and do nothing, it will be considered a failure for all of us. And it will change the strategic competition between United States and China. It will also hurt us back home because, as I mentioned in the conference, here back home, we are having this battle of ideas between capitalism and socialism. It's very likely next year depends on how the presidential election turned out. As you mentioned, there are some real socialists are running for president. If one of them become the U.S. president, we're on our way to socialism. So we have a battle of ideas to fight here domestically. So if we does nothing to help this freest city, this best example of capitalism, how are we going to win the battle of ideas back home? So I think it's inherently for American people's self-interest, for our country's self-interest, for what we stand for, we should stand in solidarity with Hong Kong people to help maintain Hong Kong's economic and political freedom.
Is it going to work? Is the protesting going to do what it's intended to do?
I don't know. I'm pessimistic about it, but I think Hong Kong people deserve to have a fight, deserve to take a stand, and that's why it's important that we join them in solidarity. Unfortunately, when United Kingdom signed that declaration of one country, two system, handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997, it's pretty much sealed Hong Kong's fate to present day. So I think there's definitely lessons to be learned from this historical experiment. But I think even if this is Hong Kongers' Alamo moment, we should stand with them. We should take a stand. We should not just do nothing, let them fail.
Mm-hmm. All right, Helen. Well, thank you so much. I have a couple of end of the podcast questions, a little bit more fun, a little bit more lighthearted, if you have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to ask, do you have any role models or people that you look to as inspiration or leaders as you continue in this work of, promoting freedom and talking about your story?
Well, my role models are my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned their stories in my book Confucius Never Said. They are extremely kind, hardworking, and they are also Christian. They're both been baptized. They have very strong faith, and sometimes I feel their faiths are much stronger than mine. And so I always look up to them, and I always remind myself, not to make them disappointed in me. So don't do anything, disappointing them, and also learn from their examples, from their sacrifice, from their suffering, and be grateful for everything I have. I'm just so grateful, for my life, for all the help and love and support they provide me. Especially the first year when I came here, all my families, especially my parents, everybody wrote me a letter on a weekly basis. Mm-hmm. And those letters carried me through many dark days. So I always look up to my parents as a role model to inspire and keep moving forward.
If you could offer a piece of advice to the next generation, what would it be?
Never give up.
Never give up. That's a good one. I should have known.
Yeah. No matter how difficult it is, never give up.
Are you much of a reader? I always like to ask people if they have any recent book recommendations or podcast recommendations or anything like that.
Yes. So I'm reading a biography about the John D. Rockefeller. And I actually learned a great deal. So it's actually gave me an article idea. I wrote an article for today. Today, August the 28th, is the 160 years anniversary of the discovery of oil well in Pennsylvania. That's give the birth to the oil industry we know today, not just in the United States, but around the world.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So what's the book called, do you know?
It's called it basically it's called the John D. Rockefeller.
Okay.
And Titan. It's called Titan, the life story of John D. Rockefeller. It was written by Ron Chernow. He's also the author of Alexander Hamilton's biography.
Okay, yeah, I've seen his name before. Do you listen to podcasts at all?
I do. So I'm listening to a podcast called Hardcore History, and it's produced by a gentleman here in Colorado. And it's each episode is like several hours long, but it's so different and interesting. He really dived into so much historical details that I did not know. And he talks about everything, history in Asia, history in Europe, and it's fascinating.
All right, I'll have to check that one out. All right, last question. As you look to the future, you seems like you're thriving and you're speaking and writing. Any dreams or hopes for yourself professionally in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's hard to see. I'd like to write a few more books, even though I know that people nowadays are, don't have enough attention span to read more books. But I think
I do.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I still have a few books in me that I like to write, and I hope someday I can be on the New York Times bestseller list. So that's probably my biggest dream, is to write a book and make it to the New York Times bestseller list.
That's an awesome goal. I love that. I will be there when you do that. I will be buying copies to help you out. So let me know when your next book is getting ready to be published, because I'll be on your launch team.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
All right, Helen. Well, I'm so glad I got to meet you last weekend, and I love following your work and really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me for this podcast interview.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for joining the podcast today. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Helen, and that you'll check out the Steamboat Institute if this conversation is something that interested you. They have a lot of great things to say about some of what Helen was talking about today, and I do some work for them on the side and have really enjoyed my time working with them. If you've been listening to the podcast, thank you so much. Please share it with a friend. That's the best way to get the word out there, and help me be able to talk with more inspiring women like Helen. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.